I love that the Bernina 880 allows me to personalize this machine with the settings, the things that will always be turned on when the machine is on. So things that we do in the settings menu will be remembered. So just kind of keep that in mind, that if you want to turn them off, you need to actually go in here and manually turn them off. Now, there's a lot of levels or layers to the settings menu. So every time that we touch on a square, you're going to notice that there's kind of a new little box that's going to show up on this top row. So as I go into an area, you'll notice that there's more and more. Keep in mind that you can come back one level by just touching the box before it. So I'll be doing that as I go. Once you are done with adding or turning on an option, you can always touch X to come back to the sewing screen. So there is all different areas here. So settings that you can set up for sewing, embroidery, customizing the screen, turning some of the sensors on or off. So if you have a trouble with a sensor and it's activating, such as it's always telling you the thread is out of the needle, for example, and it really hasn't, you can actually turn that off until you can have your local Bernina technician take a look at that and get it reset. You'll noticing that I don't have beeps being activated when I'm touching the screen, because I went in here earlier and turned all of that off. So those are things that I'm going to go through. Okay, so starting off at the beginning. In the sewing menu, let's start with this one, tension. So what does this actually mean? This is the global tension of your entire machine. So you've probably noticed that as you pick certain stitches, tensions increase or decrease accordingly based on usually what is needed for that particular stitch or that stitch's technique. Well, if you're using a lot of specialty thread, there's a time and place to adjust all the tension for all the stitches. So you can actually go up or down 2 numbers. So you can increase it or decrease it as necessary. So if you're finding you're always having to decrease your top tension or something, so your bobbin thread doesn't come up, this would be a place where you can just come here and maybe bring it down that number. Then every single stitch you pick will already be 1 or 2 numbers less for that particular tension. So just note that that is an option. To get everything back to normal, you can always touch the box with the yellow outline and it will return it back to the default setting. Next, let's talk about the needle securing at the beginning of your seam. You can actually turn that off or on. I'm going to leave it on because that is something that I do like. You can actually program your foot control. So right now, if you rock the heel back on the lower part of the foot control, the needle will sink down in the fabric, or if it's down, it will come up. So it's like the half a stitch. But now you can come in and actually pick other options for that heel. And you can turn more than one of these on at a time. So you might choose to have it lock, lock and cut, lock, cut and lift. And you can even choose what kind of locking stitch you want. So if you wanted it just to cut, you could turn everything off. You could do it to cut and lift, but sometimes it is nice to have that locking feature and with a cut and a lift. So you rock your heel back, boom, that is done. If you want it back to normal, we'll come back to the needle up, down option. Next, speed of the machine. So maximum speed 1200 stitches per minute. You can again have some range there and slow it down. We can also touch any of the buttons. So in here, and I love the picture shows with a hand touching a button. So that's how I remember there's lots more in here, lots of buttons. So what are we talking about? So for example, pattern end. You can actually touch it, and if you've touched it lately, you will notice that it will cut and lift the foot. You can also have it add a locking stitch, again as a cluster, or 4 stitches forward, 3, 2, let's say 4 or 5 or 6 stitches forward, and then it will cut and lift. So your choice there. I'm going to leave it the way it was originally planned for. The foot, you can actually change how high the foot actually comes up. So that is something that if you're working on some really thick fabric, you can adjust how many millimeters up it comes. Next, the reverse button where it has reversing or back stitching options, so you can choose that. We've done a video on what back stitching is about, and so it's actually backing up the exact same decorative stitch right back into the same hole. So that's pretty fun that it can actually do that. The locking stitch, again, a cluster of little close together locking stitches or straight stitches. If you're doing a lot of like stitching in the ditch or working with a walking foot, I often will use the stitching with little tiny stitches forward so it doesn't create a knot. It is actually a personal preference. With the scissor button, you can have it do a lock or, again, a traveling locking stitch if you were to activate that as well. And the most favorite one, and you'll see me turn this on and off multiple times, especially in our Stitching Cosmos online course, where some days I want the needle to stop down in the fabric and the foot to stay down, and other times I want the needle to stop down and the foot to raise just a little bit for pivoting, turning corners, adjusting all those curves that we go around in our Stitching Cosmos online course. If you need a little bit more room, you can set it for that higher lift as well. So if you don't want your foot lifting, well, just come in, turn it off. So some projects I want it down and not lifting, and then others I do. So again, this is probably one screen I come to the most and actually change it from one to the other quite frequently. Okay, so that's everything on that screen. And I know I'm kind of going through this quickly, but remember you can always touch the question mark and touch an area, and then it will remind you what that symbol actually is. Okay, so next is in here is a lot of our embroidery features. So again, as you go in, you can touch the question mark and you can see what those are, centering an embroidery motif, how thick your embroidery fabric is. Do you want it to cut the jump stitches or not? Do you want it to actually be in inches or millimeters? So all these different things are here. Is your hoop template not perfectly aligned? Yes, it probably does want the embroidery unit on. You can get it to be recalibrated here. And again, the tension, just like before, being able to adjust the global tension in the embroidery side of the machine. This is a fun one. This is definitely personal, where you can actually change the background color of your machine. So you can choose different options. Plus, you can actually change that kind of welcome screen, and you can say, "Hi, Sarah, let's get sewing today," or whatever you want. Funny story, I've actually had husbands come in and change this message to their wives, and we'll just say they left it on when they had their machine service, and it was quite hilarious what the little message was. It was a very nice terms of endearment, we'll say, that we, like I said, we all got to chuckle over. Settings for the sensors. Let me talk about this here. Again, if the sensor is on, so it can actually recognize when you don't have thread in the top part of your machine, or when the bobbin doesn't have any thread left in it. It will sense that and stop sewing. So these are things that you can turn on or off. I have also turned off the sound, but if you want, you can have it do different beeps or notations if you touch a stitch, if you touch a function, or if you're in the stitch regulator mode, you can have that beep when you go too fast. Kind of helps train yourself when you're working with the stitch regulator. For these videos, I always turn off the sound so it's not distracting. All right, and the last one is actually a lot of the service parts of the machine. The language, the light. I actually, once again, have the light actually less, again, so our videos look better. So normally I have a really bright light, but it washes out. So I always love that I can adjust it down. And also your screen brightness, so you can also see how it's getting darker. Again, adjust it based on maybe if you're sewing next to a window. We also have, I'm not going to touch this, but screen calibration. So if you're touching this square and this square is activating instead, you can go in and, well, here, let's do it. Adjust the calibration. So I'm glad we can do this at home. So what I need to do is actually be very careful here. I need to actually touch in the center of this little plus that's moving around the screen, and there, now it's all set. So if you ever need to recalibrate the screen, you might call your store. They might even remind you that this is here and walk you through those steps. Again, other parts of just basic maintenance, kind of resetting all the settings. Again, you can come in here and touch, as you can see, return to factory setting for embroidery, for sewing and for the whole machine. Great if you're just, like you've changed a lot of things, you just want it all back to normal. Also in this area, we do have kind of, again, calibration. If you've oiled, how to clean the thread cutter, how to update your machine, and so forth. We also have the clock in here. I was reading in the manual that there is if your clock isn't working, there's a white piece of tape that you release on the bottom of the machine, and this activates the battery for the clock. So if that has not been activated, flip it over and see if that needs to be done. Also, calibrating your buttonhole foot, that is something that you can do as well. So as you can see, there's lots of things that you can do. Remember, anything you do in the settings menu is remembered after we turn it off. And once again, you do need to come back in and either turn it back on or change it based on how your needs of sewing are changing from project to project.